Hey everyone, it's Chris G back again for a Titan's Tale. Today we got a Titan. It's been over a Titan for 30 years, and we're excited about that. Got a lot of little nuggets to share with us. Um, what kind of nuggets we're going to talk about? We're going to talk about all kinds of things today, little values and principles, which I think is important. And he's got a daily ritual that he's going to talk about. Let's introduce and welcome John Chappelear. John, welcome.
Thank you, Chris. It's really good to be here and good to be on Titan's Tales. Thank you.
Thank you. So, John, one of your big things to talk about is your daily rituals.
Right.
And can you tell me a little bit about that? The daily six, I think you call it. So,
Sure. It was one of those weird things. I just take you back for just a second because what happened for me is I spent, and actually, I think that introduction was written a little while ago because now it's getting more like 40 years of not 30 years, but
yeah,
that's
you
okay.
know,
That's all right.
you look younger. You look
You're just
younger.
looking at the notes. I continue to refuse to acknowledge that I'm actually getting this old.
I got you.
Um, I was running I started and built 5 companies in the Washington, D.C. area, which is where I grew up.
Hmm.
The third company, which I built, the bank came in and decided they wanted all their money back in about 2 weeks. So that kind of cost me that company. And it was 300 employees, covering 3 states. It was a really good distribution business and a very successful one. It just, we were open to having the loan call because we were out of ratios as far as the bank was concerned, debt to equity.
Got you. Yep.
So this was in a time where banks were looking for cash, and we were able to be cashed out. We had lots of assets and not a lot of debt, but we were still out of ratios, sales to debt.
Sure.
So I call that my gift of devastation, because it was, by the time they finished with me, I was pretty devastated.
Imagine.
The good news is I was able to start up a couple more companies after that when I finally realized it wasn't just luck. It was something that more than just being lucky. And a lot of entrepreneurs feel that way. And it's always been a surprise to me that sometimes when you have a gift of devastation, it sort of costs you your confidence, and you're not interested in going back. My partner in that business went to work for a very large company and was happy there for the rest of his career. I, on the other hand, started a couple more businesses, and then finally in the early 2004, 5, which is when I wrote my book,
Mhm.
decided that, I was going to keep working for myself. I enjoyed it. I've been working for myself since probably before you were born, since 1977. So it's probably is. It's been a great path for me, but the gift of devastation is what really set the whole thing up. So the book came out of a couple of friends of mine in the Washington area. I had dozens of other friends in the DC area who were also business owners and entrepreneurs. Some were big businesses, small business, and we had spent a lot of time over the 20 years or so I'd been running companies in the DC area, and a couple of them called me up and said, "What's going on with you? Because if I was in your place, I would have probably shot myself by now." So, what's going on? You seem kind of cool and comfortable, and you're just going on. And I
Yeah.
hadn't really thought about it. But in the book, I referred to 3 different guys who sort of showed up, sort of universe teacher. When the student is ready, the teacher appears, and they're mentioned in the book. 3 different guys who really sort of taught me a big component of what it's like to try and live daily, live in a positive frame of mind, not worry so much about what others are thinking, but worry about how to stay centered and balanced. And so I had just kind of come up with this. You were referring to it as a ritual. I hadn't really thought of it as anything other than just something I did every day. And they said, "Well, whatever you're doing, we would like to do it too. So could you come and teach me whatever you're doing? Come teach me." And so that was when I sort of decided to write out what I was actually doing. I was opening my mind to new ideas from new teachers, which was willingness. I spent some time each day in meditation, or if you're a praying person, in prayer. I've got clients who pray. I've got clients who knit. I've got clients who work on mechanical objects because it just gets them out of their minds, and they're able to just sort of be quiet in their heads. For me, it's just sit quietly, sort of a traditional meditation concept. Then the next concept is to be of service to others, because my focus when I was running the companies beforehand was pretty much, what can I get out of this? What's in it for me? And the idea was, if 6 is good, 12 is twice as good. So it's just more all the time. Let's get a bigger company, a nicer car, bigger house, higher up the hill, new wife, get some kids, kind of thing. And nothing really had any connection here. It was just looking good on the outside. So focusing on service to others sort of kept me grounded and sort of helped me keep this mind open to less hubris and more humility, kind of thing. The next one was love and forgiveness. Once I was able to sort of start thinking of other people, I was able to sort of practice the concepts of loving and forgiving. And to me, those are two sides of the same coin. It can't really be one without being the other. So I count them as one. In the book, I call love, the definition for love for me is understanding the needs of others and treating those needs as important as if they were my own. That's it. And that works if it's a spouse, child, parent, competitor, employee, boss, somebody who reports to you, somebody who you report. If you're thinking of their needs before your own needs, or at least as equivalent of your needs, then you're on the path to being a loving person. And forgiveness for me was letting go of that. I always think of it as the anti-Santa Claus, the guy walking around with a giant bag of resentment, judgment, and anger on his back all the time, walking in, carrying it home, and then making the family have a great time with you, carrying it home, and then adding a few more things into it, and then carry it back to work again.
Back to work, and then
and then
it's getting bigger,
and carry it back home. And forgiveness is just letting that go. Letting go of a weight you didn't even know you were carrying. And if you're doing it right, you will actually feel a sense of I don't know if it's spiritual lightening, or just feel a sense of being lighter and more easily moved into a positive space during the day. If that stuff is not running around subconsciously in your head about, I want to get even with him, and I remember what you did to me, and all this other stuff. And if you can just kind of let that go, it makes things much better. 5 is gratitude, to be grateful for all things at all times, not just the good stuff. I had a friend of mine, when the bank came in and decided they wanted to take over the company, said to me, one of the 3 guys said, I can't tell you if it's going to happen anytime soon, but I guarantee you within the next 5 years, you will be very grateful that the bank came in and did this. And I was like, go away, leave me alone, don't ever talk to me again, kind of thing. And the reality is, if that hadn't happened, the next 2 companies that I started would never have been as successful, because they were based on the concepts I'm talking about now. We had dramatically higher profits, almost completely eliminated turnover. We had motivated and focused people because their needs were as important to me as they were to them. And I understood what their needs were. And it just made a huge difference. And then finally, number 6 is action, because all the great planning in the world is not going to get any changes made. You actually have to do something rather than just plan for something. So it's when you're writing a new book, I went through a major New York publisher when the book first came out, and Putnam sent me a note and said, okay, well, why is your book any better or any worse than anybody else's book? Why would we want to publish your book? And the answer was, because I'm telling people to not just read this, but do something with this. And I love a lot of the stuff that's out there. I mean, I love Covey's books. I love Pat Lencioni's books and all sorts of things like that. But they explain the concepts to you, but then never say, okay, now it's your job. I gave you the ideas. Now it's your job to close the book and go do something. And then things will change, and they won't until you do something. So that's the 6, with a lot of a tag on to give you a little background. It could have been shorter than that, but I thought you might want to hear the whole story.
Oh, no, I do. After your gift of devastation, how long did it take you to come up with those concepts? I mean, because you said you had the concepts before you started your
Yes,
new business.
yes, I had this. I had the concepts. I was just using the concepts. I had these three guys that helped me. One was just a guy that I met in church one time, and he was sort of off in a corner, and there were a whole group of people surrounding him who were laughing and enjoying and chatting back and forth. And I thought, I'd like to have that, versus I get up, nobody talks to me, and I leave the door. I leave quickly and go out the door, get my car, and drive home. Versus what he was doing, which was focusing on others' needs and talking to other people and getting their feedback and listening to what they had to say. And I thought, well, if I want to be in a situation like that, I actually have to act like that.
Yeah.
Another guy was ran a large company and had exactly the same, well, not exactly the same situation, but a very similar situation in that he showed up at work one day, and as the president of the company, and the board of directors had fired him. So, it was just like, hey, but so for me, it was the bank, and for him, it was a board of directors. And so we talked about what brought us to those points and why they happened, and why we were picked, or why not we were picked, kind of thing. And then the other guy was a friend of mine who happened to be the Episcopal priest at the church. And Mark really taught me about love and forgiveness and letting these things go and the concept of gratitude. So it was just kind of, like I said earlier, when the student's ready, the teachers kind of appear. And these three guys really sort of drew me in because of the way in which they drew people to them. I mean, they weren't promoting themselves. They were just being themselves. And that encouraged people to connect with them. And so after, it probably took me, I guess, a year of talking to Mark and John and Rock to sort of get to the point where I understood what it was, and I was practicing it on a daily basis. Probably about a year, I imagine.
Well, I guess before I go to this question, so your next company, you started within a year, you think?
Yeah, but actually, I started it in about 3 months. I mean, I had some savings, but it was kind of like, bye. You don't get any settlement or segment.
No,
I owned 80%.
No golden parachute or nothing. Yeah,
that's right. I owned 80% of a $60 million a year business. But when the stock is worth zero, so is 80%. So I had to find something to do. One, to keep me from being insane, and two, to actually make some money. So I started a new business, but I started as a service business instead of a distribution company. So I didn't need trucks. I didn't need warehousing. I didn't need anything else. But I also aligned it with my old clients. So I went to the old clients, which all knew me for years and years, and said, I'm doing this. It's different. It's not competing, but it can also guarantee the same level of quality and service you've experienced when working with me before. So I didn't have to go find a whole new base of customers. I used the same customers with a different product and a much simpler process. And so, I had the first business was, 300 employees probably. And the one I started 3 months later had 5. And we ended up, it's a whole different payroll. When the payroll is only 5 people versus 300 people, you don't have to, it's not quite as big an engine you have to turn over every day. So for me, it was great. I mean, my daughter needed a job at one point along the way, and I just said, come to work for me, kind of thing. So, and that grew, and that built up a lot of the relationship that we had sort of missed while I was trying to be in control of the world, kind of thing. I jokingly say I am in recovery. I'm a recovering big shot, and so it's much more pleasant being a recovering big shot. I still look at people now that are just so filled with, hubris and sense of I am the center of the universe, and I think I've been there, and I don't ever want to go back again, because it's first of all, it's ridiculously foolish to think that you have that much control over people. But if you are balanced and centered in here, then you know what you do have? You have influence. You have a substantial amount of influence over people, positive influence. But letting go of control is hard when you sort of committed yourself to being the center of the universe. So letting go of control and beginning to understand that if I can let go of control and be balanced and centered here, then I can be influential in the way in which I live and act and talk and interact with other people. And that's kind of what, when I first saw the guy, his name was Rock, not Rock Hudson, but just Rock. And I'm not that old. So and he was the guy surrounded by people who were just chatting with him back and forth and back and forth, and learning to let go of the need to control and just be connected to other people without trying to have, well, I'm here and you're here, so I'm better than you, not just better off, but better than, kind of thing. And so when you let all that go, it makes living on a daily basis so much easier. It's dramatically different. And it's been, well, actually, I'm getting ready to come out with a 20th anniversary of the Daily Six. So it's been 20 years since the book came out.
Did your values and principles change dramatically after your devastation? I mean, was it like a 90-degree, or did you?
It was like a 180 degrees, really more likely. It's just, a lot of the things that I did, a lot of the way in which I behaved, I learned from my father, who also ran a company.
Mm-hmm.
And I worked for him for a few years and realized I really didn't like the way he ran his company. I didn't really like the way he was doing business. So I decided to leave and open my own business. And like many of us as kids, we go, I'm never going to be like that. So I look at our father, our mother, and go, yeah, that's not going to be me. And then you look around 5 years later and it's exactly what you are. I used to jokingly say, when I get angry, I would open my mouth and my mother would fall out. It's just crazy how you really don't like something, but you find yourself emulating it because it's what you've learned growing up. And so I found myself, when I finally had a chance to look back on the way in which things were, I found myself emulating a lot of the things my dad did. I had better relationships with the people, but I was still very much focused on, I need to be at the top of the pile. I need to make the most money. I need to make sure that I'm on the A list of any invitation. So I need to make sure that people know who I am and how important I am and all this other BS. So I joined every in Washington, political hype is really important, it's important if you think it's important, to get invited to the right parties and be mixing with the right people. And those are all just so critically important to me. And it's interesting because once I let go of all that, it took a little dip in as far as, was I still on this A list? And the answer is no, not really. But by the end of, remember the guy said within 5 years, by the end of 5 years, I was back on the list, not because I had some sort of high level of income or importance, but because people wanted me to be on the list rather than had to invite, we got to have him because he's such and such. They had me on the list because it was something that they wanted and to be a part of the party, a part of the group, whatever it might be. So it really was let's think, what would the old John do? Or what would my dad do? Okay, let's do the opposite of that. And rather than focusing on my needs, focusing on the needs of others was something that I had just never thought of before. I figured let's just do what I know, and I don't need any input. I don't need anything else because I'm smarter, faster, better, quicker than anybody else. And the sad thing is, I'm working with people today in coaching and in training and in leadership culture. These kinds of things are finally sort of catching up with the Daily Six, which is they're realizing that engagement, connection, emotional values are really important in building a company that reduces turnover, reduces absenteeism, or makes people feel better about themselves. People are finally beginning to realize that this isn't just anecdotal. When I first started, it was just, I know this works because I've done it in my companies and I've done it in dozens of other companies, but I still don't have any worldwide or European level studies that say an engaged person does this and a disengaged person does this. But today they have those studies and they show it's a dramatic change in the way in which an engaged person and a disengaged person work, and how much your turnover is, how much your absenteeism is.
Productivity.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I mean, and that's the thing. I mean, when I go to people, And I asked them, what's one of the things that you'd like to have happen by the time we finish working together? And engagement is almost always one of the words that pops up, you know. And I say, okay, well, what's the difference between a couple and an engaged couple? What's the difference here? And the difference is an emotional connection. The engaged couple has an emotional connection that just the normal two people don't. So we need to build an emotional connection between you and the company and the people and the company and each other, so that they begin to feel a sense of engagement. Because without the emotional connection, you can't really, intellectually, people don't get emotionally connected. Intellectually, they become intellectually connected, but it doesn't really resonate
It's
in
not
here.
as
It's
not
just
as
it's
deep.
just here, not here. And this is where the changes really occur.
And for those on my guests who can't see you, you're talking about intellectual will be up in your brain,
Yes, exactly.
whereas in your
Right.
heart,
Engagement is in your heart
right?
and in your brain too, but it really is resonating in your heart.
Sure.
Um, it's it, it makes all the difference in the world. And one of the things that's interesting, and I'm going to make a change in this new book, is that I added a little bit in the original Daily Six about people who care too much for other people. I had originally written it because it was sort of my side of the case was I have to start paying attention to other people's needs. And then I realized there's a whole group of people there that are already doing that way over the top, to the point where they are exhausted from caring about other people. And it was weird because I ended up working in the Middle East a lot from about 2008 or so to when COVID started. And almost all the work I did in the Middle East was in hospitals.
Mhm.
And most of all the work I did in the hospitals was with nurses who were exhausted and stressed out and just exhausted and from being too much focused on the needs of others, rather than making sure that they took care of themselves, took the breaks they needed, made sure they got something to eat, got enough rest. And it was always like, well, just a couple more hours and then I'll do this or I'll do that. And it was realizing that teachers, nurses, 911 people, um, the people who were sort of first responders tend to be focused on the needs of others, and getting them to realize that their needs are every bit as important as the people that they're working with. Not, my needs aren't down here and your needs are up here. The way I was living was the other way around. My needs are way up here and yours are way down. But when we had to bring them in line so that they're just as important, not more important or less important. Oh, you can't see my hands, can you?
No, oh, I can't. My
That's right.
resident
It's
can't,
very
but
exciting. I know.
they're
I'm very
bringing them back
visual.
into level.
I don't know how this is going to work out with just an audio, but I think if people understand, if they're the kind of person where everybody else is. I'm always trying to make sure that the perfect mom's always thinking of everybody else's needs and not their own. And I've run into so many people, male, female, young, old, that just have that. And it's a wonderful syndrome. I mean, the idea of caring and nurturing others to success is really good, but it doesn't help you if you spend all that time from a position of exhaustion. You've got to nurture yourself before you can really do that with others.
Well, bringing that into balance, I got a couple examples. Well, not examples. I got a couple questions for you as the consultant. Um, in my corporate life and in my personal businesses, I've had to lay off people in the past.
Mm,
And there'll be times where I would think that I probably waited longer than I should have because
mm,
I was worried about the other people.
right.
And I think worrying about the other people is important, but at what level or at what point do you think that you're in balance and you got to make a decision that's, I guess, best for everyone
Right.
in the long run,
Right.
but it sure hurts. How do you go about that?
Well, it it's it doesn't get any easier. I can tell you that for sure.
Right.
Um, not if you're if you're connected, again, if you're connected with people, it doesn't get any easier. George Clooney was in a movie where he flew around the world and just laid people off. That was his job. And so
Hmm.
there was no emotional connection. It was just, okay, you guys don't work here anymore, goodbye, and get on a plane, fly to the next city. And I was never able to do that because I guess it's why they have the advanced officers separated from the enlisted people, because I've got to send these people into combat, and I've got to not worry so much about whether Jim gets hurt or not. But when you're running a company, those decisions need to come up. And I'll tell you, with an engaged, productive organization, it doesn't come up as much, because you're getting a maximum level of productivity out of each person. What happens when you don't have an engaged group is that at least 25 or 30% of the people are not engaged, and some are even disengaged, not trying to help, but actually trying to hinder. And so, but to get back to the point of, well, what happens now, the thing I have learned is that if you are open with your people, with your communication, especially in the way in which you are reviewing them and their work. This is one of the things that I teach a lot of people about, which is how to do an annual performance review so that the person's not angry when they leave the performance review.
Right.
And that is to talk about the performance review should be a byproduct of a series of meetings that you have had the whole year. Okay, so it's just a matter of, well, the last month when we were together, you were moving this way and it's still moving. That's just fantastic. Versus the person walks in and thinks they've been doing great, and you're going to tell them that they're fired. So, you need to keep their expectations and reality connected to each other, but with frequent meetings. That helps a lot. So then they know whether or not they're, on the way out the door or on the way up to success. But I had to lay off a whole division once, and it was way back at the beginning of when computer supplies were becoming just something that everybody had. It wasn't something that you had to go to a computer supply store to get
it. Right.
It was becoming very much a commodity. And we had a division that was specifically focused on computer supplies, and we had to get rid of that and just move it into the general population. We were able to take a few of the salespeople and move them into the general population because they were comfortable doing that. But there were half a dozen people who had no interest at all in furniture, office supplies, or anything else. They just wanted to sell this, and it was like, okay, well, we're not selling that anymore. So what I tried to do is give them enough notice. The two things that I found is that as an owner, like you said, I tend to put these things off. And because it's an uncomfortable situation. It just is, and it's hard. In some conditions, it's heartbreaking. I've met guys men and women who have been in the bathroom throwing up before they had to come back and fire somebody because they were just so upset emotionally. And I find nothing wrong with that. But for us, we had like I said earlier, $60 million a year business. $2 million of it was computer supplies. Okay, but a huge proportion of our expenses, we had trucks lined up and then pickers and packers and space in the warehouse and all sorts of stuff. It was way out of proportion as far as the cost of running it versus the income of running it. So the decision was pretty easy from a tactical standpoint, but from an emotional standpoint, it was hard. But we set up a program to help the people find another job. We went out and contacted some labor people and had them come in and meet with them. We didn't necessarily get anybody. I don't remember whether we got anybody other jobs, but we brought in people to help them find jobs. It was a small industry. In the Washington, D.C. area, there were only probably 25 or 30 people in the D.C. area who did what we did. And I knew all the owners. So I called the owners and I asked them if they could use these people. So we tried very hard to find an outplacement process to help them. We gave them a reasonable amount of severance, and then we just said and then we've got to change positions. I used to joke that, the poor performers that we had, we used to mail. People probably don't remember mail, but think of it this way: we used to email our poor performers' resumes to our competition so that the competition could hire the poor performers instead of us. But for us, it was trying very hard to do that, but still doing it. I mean, it's just not an easy process. It's not easy today. It wasn't easy then. Myers, the people who are working with you. If the company's got less than a couple of hundred employees, the employees. Mm-hmm. and you know what they're doing. You know, if they just bought a house, or the wife's pregnant, or she just quit her job and wants to do something else, and so they need money, and this is not a good time, or it's 3 weeks before Christmas, or it's it's almost his birthday, or there's always something. But if you don't take care of the company, then nobody has a job. It's just nobody has a job. So
That's what my old boss used to say. You got to do.
right.
You got to do it for
hard,
for the remainder, for the people who are staying.
right.
So,
And you got to make sure that the people who are staying because they are the kind of people that you want to have in your team. They're not necessarily just the people that you've had forever. Well, Billy's been here for 30 years and he's a poor performer, but I'm keeping him, kind of thing.
Well, that's very important because we had a layoff. I was in charge of a printing company, and we had a layoff, and had another layoff, and I hated them because at that time HR made us, and it's not their fault, it's rules, but we had to let them off based on a common denominator with time.
Right.
And what frustrated me was, it's like, well, I'm getting rid of some of those I really don't want to get rid of.
Right.
So back in 2000, well, it was 2006, and I was over in Germany, and we noticed that it was hitting over there first before it hit over here in 2008.
Hmm.
And my boss and I were together, and he goes, "You know that it's going to come." And I said, "Yeah." So what I meant, what he was telling me was another layoff's going to happen. So I
Right.
decided that I hate layoffs, that I was going to, and we went through a lot of process of offering our layouts and identifying the people that we didn't want. And I don't have a problem with firing people. I have a problem with layoffs because they didn't do anything wrong.
Right.
But the firing people or encouraging them to leave or whatever we decided to do, or if they quit and we didn't replace them.
Right.
Well, that's
Right.
simple to do. That solves my problems. But anyway, I'd like to revert back to our previous. You were talking about when you were making a change and you were you're recovering big shot, and how you're. I want to know, did your family feel the same way prior to, or did they feel he's a big shot and you don't have time for us? And then all of a sudden you made this come to Jesus change of,
Yeah.
hey,
Well, full disclosure, while I was being a big shot, I managed to end up divorced, and my kids really couldn't stand me too much.
I'm
So
sorry.
because I had done so many, excuse me, I had done so many things that said, sorry, let me get a drink.
That's all right. Yeah.
Too many years as a keynote speaker. Got it's worn out like Rod Stewart. So
Yeah.
What happened was I just put me and the business way ahead of my family. Even though I'm just doing this for you and I want us to have a wonderful home and all these other things, but reality is I was doing it for me. And eventually, the wife said, you can only skip so many anniversaries, you can miss so many birthdays or going back to school nights. And we just are here now. We're not together and we're not coming back together. So we ended up divorced, and the kids weren't particularly happy with me. The good news for me was that in this change, I had just gotten remarried, and I had a 2-year-old son who had just been born from the new marriage.
Mm-hmm.
So it gave me, and Susan is one of these people that just won't let bad relationships stand. She made me reconnect with my father. She had me reconnect with the girls. She even had me reconnect with my ex-wife, which wasn't as easy as you would like to think, but you can only piss somebody off so much and for so long until they finally go, you know what? I don't care how nice you are now. I don't
Anybody around you.
Just skip it. Thank you. But the girls, I think kids always want to be with their parents if it's an option. And being married to Susan just made a huge difference in the way in which I related to the kids and in the way in which I related to just people in general. So getting remarried was a big help. Running into the three guys that's about the same time I ran into the three guys that sort of helped me create the formulation of what the Daily Six were going to be. So I was practicing that. I was trying to be a good husband. I was focused on being a good dad. and then the girls just came back. I became a person they wanted to be around. So I remember saying that to my friend who was the Episcopal priest, Mark. I said, the kids come over and they just kind of wander off and do their own thing. They don't really connect, with me. They're still sort of still carrying that resentment. I really wish they would sort of jump out of the car and run over and give me a hug and hi, Dad, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And Mark said, well, why don't you hug them? Why don't you run over and hug them instead of waiting for them to run over and hug you? And it was just like, bing, kind of one of those. Well, of course that would make sense. It's the leader or the team head or the parent that has to extend themselves first before the other people will come in. The president has to make the place welcoming. The parent has to make the family welcoming so that the child will feel comfortable extending themselves. Whether you're a parent and you're comfortable with it, doesn't make any difference. Just extend yourself. And then eventually what will happen is the situation you want to have happen, the child coming to you, all of a sudden will begin to happen because you've extended yourself. You may be uncomfortable with it, but you've done it anyway. And you find yourself on the good side of a relationship for the first time in however long it's been. And so, I kept that in mind for, as Susan and I have now been married 38 years, I guess. And, it's once you get married and you're married for a long time, things just sort of fall into a routine. And I remember Mark's comments, when was the last time you hugged them? And so I try to make sure that I keep this, I don't take anything for granted anymore. The girls are grown and I have grandchildren graduate from high school, but I still make sure I call the girls or they call me. I still make sure I talk to all the kids as often as I can. They're hither and yon. I've got, we live in Florida. One daughter lives in Atlanta. One daughter lives in Honolulu. Our son lives in San Diego. So either they really have a good time or they just wanted to get as far away as possible. I don't know. I'm not really sure, but it's, they're happy. They've built their own lives. They have kids. They're very successful in business. So, I'm just really grateful that I was able to make the changes I made in the time in which they were still young enough to be able to come back into the family without any long-term resentments.
Sure. So for my listeners who are entrepreneurs or wanting to become an entrepreneur and going through the process of building a business, how did your value, not, I wouldn't say values, did your policies change with the new business versus the old business as related to family or work ethic or something to that effect?
Yeah.
I know you have went from a bunch
Yeah.
to a smaller number, but
Right. Well, well, in that case, yes, but for me, in a lot of consulting work I do, I'm working with a very large company and trying to get them to understand that this emotional connection is critically important for changing the way in which the general dynamic of the whole culture of the organization will change. So when I started the new company, yes, it was people that initially it was people I trusted. So I didn't have to worry too much about whether or not I was looking over their shoulders. But it became important that things like you got your birthday off your birthday was a national holiday as far as I was concerned,
right.
And you did things like we made sure that we thanked the family for allowing us to take so much of the time with the employee, whoever it was, so that we connected the employee back to their family and made them realize what a hero we considered them to be at work, and allowed the family to give us this much time, so that there was a connection between not just the company and the employee, but also between the company, the employee, and their family. Many times that's not thought of, especially with somebody who's new to being an entrepreneur. It's, they've got a great idea, and the issue is, I always think of it as, I've got a great idea, and here's my little fire. I got a big fire burning out here, which is my great idea. But as your great idea succeeds, and this is what was that book called? It had to do with E. It had to do with the entrepreneur moving from entrepreneur to president of the company kind of thing.
The E-Myth.
Yes, E-Myth, I think it was.
Yep.
And it's that here's the fire and it's burning like crazy, and the 10 or 15 people that get to surround it with me get to feed off of that fire. And that's great. But if you want to build a company that's got 200 or 300 people, you've got to find a way to transition that fire, because everybody can't gather around the table. They're just it's too big a group of people to sit around the table. So you have to make sure and that you spend the time it takes to connect with the people. Sam Walton, before probably the 10 years before he died at Walmart, literally went to every Walmart he could and sat down, talked to the people, and made sure that they knew him and that they understood his values, and that he was supportive of their needs as well. And that was he was always one of my heroes as far as the ability to realize that the connection between leadership and the workers is critically important to the overall organization. So what happens a lot of times with business owners is that it's my idea. It took off. We're doing amazingly well. I must be a genius.
Yeah.
And so versus I must be amazingly grateful for the people I have allowing me to be this successful. So it's a matter of perspective. And before it was, I'm the genius, this is my fire, you're lucky to be here kind of thing, versus this is my idea, this is my fire, and welcome to it. And welcome to helping. I will help make you successful, and you can help make me successful, and we'll work on this together. And when that change became part of my daily existence, it changed the entire dynamic between the people who are working for me and me, and it changed the dynamic between how hard it was to be more successful, because other people wanted to be as successful as I did. So it was, it wasn't just I'm driving these people. I used to talk about it. It's like if you're in a traditional organization, it's like a guy with a lasso around the 20 people in his team trying to pull them forward. And if it's in a well-engaged organization, it's 20 people trying to pull the leader along, because they're all engaged just as much as he is or she is. So it's much easier to be successful when you're focused on the needs of others. Yeah.
Like a team of horses in a wagon.
Yeah, exactly. Versus the other way around.
Yeah.
The wagon's trying to pull the horses. It's the kind of thing. It just doesn't work. So you've got to have the team engaged in the goal as much as you are engaged in the goal. And I was just talking to a friend of mine who's got a new book coming out. And it's exactly what we were talking about. The idea that to be influential, it requires an emotional connection to the people's goals and the people's needs. Because if you're an entrepreneur, you got to remember one thing, is that people change for their reasons, not for your reasons. They change for their goals, not for your goals. And your job is to try and find a way to align your goals with their goals. I want to get my kids in college. Okay, well, then we'll do this path, and then their kids will be in college. I want to do whatever it is. I mean, at one point when the second company was bigger than the first one I started after the office supply business. But, I had people who were, had reached a level of income that they couldn't get any more income. So what we said was, well, then what would you like to learn? What can I do? So we just paid for anything they wanted to learn at the community college. I didn't care if it was small motor, want to work on a lawnmower, or you want to learn Spanish, or you want to learn accounting, or I don't care. If that's your goal, we'll help you find a way to achieve it. And it was kind of like, wow, nobody ever did that before. Well, and when you can say that, I'm one of the few companies that would ever even think about working on helping you achieve your personal goals, that's a real different perspective than normally just, well, I got to go to work.
Well, that's when I would wander, we would manage by walking around. That was our mantra.
Yeah. MBWA.
Yep. One of the common questions I got was, well, how can I make more money? How can I make more money?
Right.
And depending on who it was, I'd sometimes explain the fact that, we're in the market and this is the value of what you do.
Right.
And you've been here a long time. I just can't give you a raise based on you being here a long time because
Right.
that job only pays that. But I said, and this kind of started our cross training program. I said, I tell you what, if you'll learn how to operate that machine, which paid more,
Hmm.
give you a raise. And the purpose was twofold. I always say it got what they wanted. And
Right.
if they were really serious about getting more money, then they'd learn how to run that machine.
Right.
And that kind of tested them because sometimes I have people like, well, they back down. It's like, well, I just want more money. Well, that's not
Yeah.
what I need.
Yeah, I do too.
But so what happened was that when people were sick, the main operator was sick. I had somebody be able to step up
Mm.
into that position. So
The cross
I didn't have,
training idea.
exactly. And I didn't
Yeah.
have to turn off any machinery
Right.
or more expensive machinery. And it was like a win-win for everybody. And
Yeah.
then when I had the position come open, that person's already trained. They can even make more money by moving into that position completely.
Right.
100%.
Right.
So that was a good thing. And
But
this
if you hadn't paid attention, you wouldn't have known that was the goal. You wouldn't have known
that's
that person just wanted more money. You have to take that. Okay, well then let's talk about how we can make that happen. You have to actually take the time to find out the needs, clarify the goal, and see if you can align that with something you can help provide them.
Sure.
And that takes a lot more time and energy than just shut up and get back to work. It's the leadership, the way I talk about, is much more, I wouldn't call it difficult, but it's much more time consuming than just being a boss. Being connected takes a lot more effort than just telling people who's in charge. You need to get back to it.
And by doing that, at least I felt, and you're going to get some people who really care. And they're
Right.
going to tell you the truth. Whether you want to hear it or not, it's a different story, but they're going to tell you.
Right.
So,
No, I agree. I agree.
lastly, this is going to segue into my last part. I watched a video that you did, and I really enjoyed it. I'm going to talk about it before we go. And it's about accepting, changing, and leaving it alone. Can
Yeah.
you elaborate a little bit on that?
Sure. It's another one of those just weird things that I said. That's where Recovering Big Shot came from. That was just off the top of my head in the middle of a keynote. And I said, I need to write that down so I don't forget that. And it was the same thing: accept it, leave it, or change it. Just sort of clicked in my head one day, and I started thinking about it. And I thought, that's everything. That's whether it's a marriage or a job or a relationship. The only thing you can't do, you can't leave your kids. They're your kids. But I've seen people stay in jobs that they hated. They've been marriages that have been so dysfunctional that and it's just like, well, that's just where I am. It's what I'm doing. It's kind of like, I'm just a mule pulling the plow kind of thing. It's like, that's really not a very positive way to look at your life. So acceptance is one of those things that I learned really can take a dramatic amount of pressure off of your back. I just sent this to a friend of mine on LinkedIn yesterday. Was that acceptance really makes all the difference in the world as far as simply allowing me to just stay in a balanced and peaceful place. It doesn't mean agreement. It just means, acceptance. I can accept your position. I don't agree with it in any way, but I can accept it because it's not going to let it churn around in my heart, turn around in my consciousness. I'm just going to accept it and let it go. And then if I can't accept it, then I still have two choices. I can leave it, or I can change it. And if you're working in an organization where, you just can't accept the toxic culture you're in, and you're not in a position where you can change that toxic culture, then it clearly leaves you with leaving, instead of just complaining, because there's nothing worse than having somebody who can't really accept it, has the ability to change it, but won't leave. Because if you can change it, you should try. You don't have to be able to do it, but at least if you like where you are and you like what you're doing, and try to make it work. If you love your family and you want to stay with your family, try to make it work. I've met so many people over the years that have said, if I had just done this when I was still married, I pay so much attention. My wife used to complain that I never paid any attention to the kids, and now I get them every other weekend. I pay all kinds of attention to. I'm like, well, if you'd done a little more of that, but we won't get into what you should have done. But it's really pretty simple. If it's a relationship that you're in on just about any level, whether it be, but the three sort of hot rails of communication, which is, politics, sports, and religion. These are all get into where people really get sort of dug in and hold onto positions. And, these are places where acceptance is really important. I don't really, I kind of leave those things out if somebody wants to talk to me. Let's leave these 3 points completely off the table, and I'm happy. We can talk about anything else you want. Because I'm not trying to change anybody's mind. I'm really trying to be the kind of person that somebody, just like with Rock in the church that day, I want to be the person that somebody looks at and goes, God, all these people are talking and they're happy and they're chatting back and forth, and he's really a component of that. And that's the kind of way I want to live. I want to attract people, not promote myself. And I've had a lot of friends over the years say, you really ought to get like more marketing people getting, out there telling your story. And I'm like, well, I'm okay. I don't need to make a killing anymore. I just need to make a living. Sure. And it's I'm happy. Also people say, how come you're not retired? I'm like, because I really like what I do. I've never, when I was selling stuff, paper clips, rubber bands, websites, whatever it was, I never had anybody send me a note that said, I just read this, or I just saw this, or I watched your video, and it changed the way I'm thinking about my whole life, or it changed my family relationship, or changed the way I can relate to my boss now. I never had anybody say that. Thank you so much for just what you wrote or what you said. I never got that when I was selling, desks and chairs, rubber bands, kind of thing. So it's just, I'm really grateful to be able, like the guy said, I bet you in a few years, you're going to be grateful that this happened. And the reality is I am so grateful to be where I am today, because I would be such a self-absorbed pain in the ass by this time. There had been no way to crack the shell of ego that would have been surrounding me by this time.
Well, if you're in DC, you might be a politician by now.
Oh God, no! I spent so many years in and out of the Capitol. Actually, when I was a kid, we lived right downtown. When I was a kid, we used to roller skate in the basement of the Capitol, and that was in the days of metal roller skates and marble floors. And there's nothing better than careening off a couple walls, sliding on a marble floor with a pair of roller skates with the police chasing you in behind. So, you probably couldn't get metal roller skates into the Capitol anymore. But yeah, I spent enough time with politicians. And in those days, it was really a dramatically more amicable relationship. It was my gentleman across the aisle versus you're an ass, kind of thing. But it's a tough place.
It's a different today than it was.
Yeah.
Well, John, thank you for your time today.
Oh,
I understand you have a very successful newsletter. How would somebody find your newsletter, or want you to be a speaker or something to that effect?
Well, the easiest thing is probably send me an email. I know that's a weird way to say it, but if you send me an email to john@johnchappelear.com, I can respond with my link tree thing, which connects you to everything all in one thing. Otherwise, I'm on pretty much every social media channel, and most of them I've been on long enough that it's my name. That's my name for LinkedIn. It's my name for Facebook. It's, kind of thing. My website is it's johnchappelear.com. So if you go to the website, it will connect you to the newsletter. If you go on LinkedIn, it will connect you to my posts on LinkedIn, which also connect you back to the newsletter. So, and I try very hard to respond to any texts or emails that come in, on a personal response. I don't try to send any auto responders back. So you know, if somebody's interested or has a problem or an issue, whether you can afford it or you can't afford it, I'm happy to talk to you and at least try to help you get on the right path, so you can work on yourself.
Awesome. Chappelear is spelled Chapppp, two P's, Elear.
Yes. It took me till 8th grade to get that right, by the way. But yes, Chappelear. Can't tell you how many times a day I still say that all the time. You know, and how many times it's been pronounced Macapelier or Chanderelle or anything else. But when people finally get Chappelear, they remember it. And I call them 5 or 6 years later and go, hey, this is John Chappelear. Oh yeah, hey John, how you doing? Versus this is Phil Rogers. Who? I don't
Yeah, I don't know Phil Rogers. Well, thank you, John, and thank you for being a Titan today.
Hey Chris, thanks a lot for having me. I've had a great time.
All right, appreciate it. Bye-bye.
Take care.